Latin America. Tommy, okay,
Hi.
Mexico City.
Dan Tartakovsky from Mexico City. I would love to know when you are going to Mexico. In Mexico, we have some new troubles. Even the leaders of the community, they say there's no anti-Semitism. We have. In the last months, I sent by mail to some of my colleagues from the room, to some of the leaders of the organization, some videos that show how it's growing anti-Semitism in Mexico. We have some problems with the Muslims that they come from Spain. They go to Oaxaca, the borders with Guatemala, to the Indians, to the people, to the poor people, to try to make them, and they're very successful in what they're trying to do. They convert the Christian Indians, the poor people, to the Muslims. They teach and they put their sons in madrasas, and they begin to teach them about the Muslim religion, and they make them fanatics. That happened in the borders with Guatemala and more to the Central Latin American countries. Also, like tell, with economic problems, there's growing the anti-Semitism in Mexico. We have more than 1,500 pages of anti-Semitism in the internet. Even some of the deputies and the senators of Mexico are helping to put laws against the anti-Semitism. And we are doing our work, all the Jewish organizations, but it's growing. It's growing, and it's more difficult in Mexico because I think that Mexico, or I know that Mexico is serving like a bridge for the terrorism, for the Muslims, for the fanatic people. And the community is a little bit small, it's between 35,000 and 45,000 people, but it's very concentrated in 4 or 5 places like Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, and there's a new, very small community in Cancun.
Do you want to get to your question?
The question is how we can fight that, and how you can help us.
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to say to a lot of people, I don't have a complete answer after 6 months. One question I have back to you is, we have a potential ally in Pope Francis. And so in Catholic countries, I'm very interested in hearing that if what Pope Francis has already said and what we think he may say in the future, at least we've speculated, about the relationship between Catholicism and Judaism, the evil of anti-Semitism, if that is more widely disseminated in a place like Mexico, it will not have much of an impact. Well, that's useful to know.
That's what I'm telling you. They come from the Middle East, from Spain, from Catholic countries, Muslim people represented here, and they convert them to the Muslim faith.
Okay, we need to move on. Honorary President Tommy Bear.
Appreciate your remarks. I have several questions. I noticed, as a matter of interest from your remarks, and when you were talking about increasing anti-Semitism throughout Europe, that you did not use the word Muslim once. And I'd like to have some thoughts, although you've been on board only 6 months, about your feeling, determination, belief, how the increase of the Muslim population throughout Europe is related to increasing anti-Semitism, and what can and should be done by those nations who don't promote assimilation and integration as does the United States. What, if anything, can we do, or should we do, to prevail upon those nations, considering the independence, obviously, of those countries? Also, we have a State Department Human Rights Watch, which it would appear to me perhaps should be somewhat more energized with respect to those countries, even though they're allies of ours, because this is a frightening spectacle. then what do you think B'nai B'rith can do as an international organization which has a presence in all of the countries you've referred to? What can we do by way of an international thrust, and what can we do by the way of B'nai B'rith in those particular organizations, in particular countries, such as Latin America and Europe and even Ukraine? Finally, you did mention Russia and how it's easier now. I don't want to misquote you, but of course that's all the result of Jackson Vanik many, many years ago. And the United States was successful in that venture. How can we replicate that if we have to?
Well, those are a lot of very good questions. Let me start with the first, and I apologize for my lack of skill in portraying things. I actually did mention Muslims, but it clearly didn't come across. In Western Europe, the situation of anti-Semitism and the levels of violence are largely because of these immigrant Muslim communities. There's no doubt about this. And I think it's our job, the U.S. government, to make sure that the first thing that happens in all these places, Western and Eastern Europe, is that people grapple with the actual facts. And though I think most people will say the French government has done a pretty good job on recognizing some of the problems, especially compared to 10 years ago. The one thing I think some of them have a hard time doing is talking about Muslim violence on Jews. And that's frankly what's happening in places like France and Belgium. Now, as I said, I mentioned before, these Muslim communities have their own problems, and there's a lot of Islamophobia. Nonetheless, significant minorities of them are willing to perpetrate violence against Jewish communities. And until governments recognize that it is not, as some would say, just a matter of communal tensions, it's not a matter of communal tensions. Jews are not beating up Muslims. Jews are not killing Muslims. Until we recognize what is happening exactly, we can't begin to, and they can't begin answering those questions. And again, I think the French government, I want to emphasize, from my experience, has done some good things, but there is a reluctance, I think partially because of the secular nature of the French Republic, because I think probably, I'm guessing that they recognize themselves, they have failed to integrate this community into a Western society. And it's not something they like bringing up. So I think that's the first part, and it's definitely, when you look at the Frost survey, there's no question that these, though I don't think I remember whether Muslims are mentioned or not, it is crystal clear that violence is a greater worry in Western Europe than it is in Eastern Europe. And this is correlated with larger Muslim populations. In terms of the State Department's activities here, I would refer you to the Human Rights Report and the International Religious Freedom Report. Both reports come out in the spring of each year, and you can go online again and get them. And for roughly 60 countries, particularly in the International Religious Freedom Report, we report extensively on anti-Semitism. And that is the part of the title of this job. It's to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. And our posts, embassies, consulates around Europe and Latin America are reporting. They monitor this stuff, and I think from what I've seen, they do a pretty good job. But monitoring is necessary, but the easiest part of this job. The toughest part is combating. Now, I don't have an answer for how exactly we're going to combat this. My mother always told me, if you don't know, say so. I don't know exactly how the U.S. government should be doing this. I know we have a number of tools, many of which we've already used, but we need to do it more extensively. And though I can't, as a U.S. government representative, tell Jewish organizations what to do, I am happy to work with your leadership, both lay and staff, to talk about what I'm seeing, give them information, tell them what we are doing. And I think we have some really exceptional staff here at B'nai B'rith, but also in other national Jewish organizations that I have great confidence that we can come up with a strategy. This is, again, it would be a lot easier we could say anti-Semitism is rampant, it's the same in all these countries, and this is the problem. But it's not. And we do ourselves a disservice by not describing it exactly as it is. So that's the conundrum. I don't have an easy answer. Hopefully, if I come back in a year, I can tell you more about what the U.S. government's done, and we can have some more discussions with community leaders, and they can be putting together strategies, again, separate from the U.S. government, but maybe complementary given their knowledge of what we're doing. So I wish I had a better answer, but unfortunately I don't.
Next question. Do we have something from our representatives from France or Italy? Not at this time. Okay, great. We'll move on.
Hello, my name is Ed Rudensky. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. My question has two parts to it. To start off with, in Eastern Europe, Putin recently came out and made a statement about the first Soviet government being over 80% Jewish. And I'm just wondering what kind of a response slash monitoring mechanism does the US government have for the anti-Semitic statements made by the Russian government in particular? And the second part of my question is, and relates to the Prime Minister of Turkey, Erdogan, and all the blatant anti-Semitic statements he's been making towards Israel in particular, and the blood libel that's been shown on TV and the media, various media outlets that are associated with his party. Why isn't the government making a stronger statement against him? Turkey is part of NATO and a fairly close ally of ours. Thank you.
Yeah. First off, let me take Turkey. The president has recently criticized publicly in remarks the Turkish government's comments about Jewish diaspora being part of the what's behind the riots in Turkey. There have been other, I can tell you, there have been other actions that we have talked to the Turkish government, but more needs to be done. I hope to go to Turkey pretty soon to see myself that community, and I've heard a lot of reports on how they react, but I think it is a place. Greece and Turkey have different situations, but it's a part of the world where we're concerned about both those areas, and I think we will continue to monitor it. Russia, I will be very frank, has not been on our priority list. I'm not sure when Putin made those remarks. I kind of am aware of something along those lines. And when I was in Hungary, I had a parliamentarian, head of a committee that deals with the community, start the same type of line with me, saying, start off this conversation saying, in the late 40s, all the communists in the Politburo in Hungary were all Jews. And I said, and I responded, I said, you know, with all due respect, what does that have to do with anti-Semitism today? A. B, he wanted to make that argument. At the same time that was happening, Stalin was purging all the Jews out of the Communist Party, not just in the Soviet Union, but in Eastern Europe as well. And he was beginning to kill some of them. It was a doctor's plot. Moreover, Hungarian anti-Semites can't have it both ways. I just seen posters in the Holocaust Museum, the Jewish communists, the Jewish capitalists. Which is it? Can't have them both. And I came back pretty hard, and I think it's important for us to do so. Now, in Putin's case, as I said, I frankly don't see Russia as a priority, not to say that anti-Semitism is not a problem. One of the things you have to be worried about, though, I think is, that was a comment I had talking to a colleague in the State Department the other day, who said to me, well, why are we always criticizing European countries? After all, most of them are at least some form of democracy. And I said, well, it's very simple. There are no Jews left in these authoritarian states. By and large, they're getting out, or have gotten out, like throughout the Middle East. So then you have to, when democracies are imperfect, even ours is, you have to criticize them. But one of the problems with authoritarian countries is, even though, say, if you want to argue that Putin has not been a threat to the Jewish community by and large, has some very close contacts with the community, there's better relations with Israel than there's been in a while. One always worries in an authoritarian country what happens when the leader changes his or her mind, or what happens when there's a new leader. There are no institutions to protect Jewish communities, etc., like in democratic societies. So I'm worried about those places. Even those places that don't have high levels of anti-Semitism, or you have good government reaction to some forms of anti-Semitism, because they can turn on a dime.
We're going to take two more questions. Bill Berger from Colorado, and then down in front here.
Thank you. In addition to a lot of anti-Semitism in majority Muslim countries, there's been a lot of violence against the Christian communities as well. It seems to me that the United States, in its approach to being a leader of the world, should be speaking out against anti-Christian activities as well as anti-Semitic communities. From your position, what would you like the United States government to say? What kind of leadership role in the world would you like us to take in speaking out against this violence?
Well, that's an excellent question, Bill. My job is defined as fighting anti-Semitism, combating and monitoring, not combating other forms of intolerance and hate. Having said that, I work in what's called the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau of the United States, of the State Department. And every day, we have horrendous stories. As you mentioned, the Christians in the Middle East are facing what Jewish communities faced 20, 30, 40 years ago. And these countries, at least the United States government's belief, will be dramatically poorer if they become monocultures and they lose Christian minorities. It is a huge problem. And frankly, there are problems with Muslims. Muslims in Burma are badly being discriminated against and killed in large numbers. And one of the conundrums in my job is, I think it's really important to reach out to people like the Pope, even if he might not help in a place like Mexico, and encourage them as allies, because we need allies, not just Jewish community, not just the US government, to reach out to people like the 16 imams we took, when I first came on this job, we took 16 imams to Auschwitz, who came out of that experience writing some very dramatic stuff about anti-Semitism and the importance of the Muslim world understanding what happened to the Jewish community, because those lessons are relevant to all of us. And that Holocaust denial is a real antithetical to Islam. So we need those allies. And I sometimes ask people who have said to me, well, you really, yes, those other issues are important and you need to focus, and someone needs to focus on it, but not you. You have a particular job. And my response is, that's true, and I need to keep that focus. But how can I ask others to help us in fighting anti-Semitism if we don't lend our voice periodically to other forms of intolerance? And beyond even religious intolerance, you go to a place like Hungary where Jews have real problems. Government is doing some okay things there, and they're trying to help in some ways, but in some ways we need to push them. But everybody will tell you, the Roma, some people would call them, they'd call them in the past gypsies, the Roma are in much worse shape. And Jobbik, which is the anti-Semitic party with street militia, Jews generally don't get attacked because they're mainly in Budapest. Jobbik is not as strong there as they are in rural communities. And Jobbik beats up Roma consistently. They've killed Roma. Roma are in real trouble. And the United States government is doing things. As far as the Christians, there is a major, we already are working on trying to protect Christians like the Copts in Egypt, the State Department, but Congress is also thinking of creating some kind of special envoy for minorities in the Middle East, which is going to largely mean Christians. So hopefully more can be done. I think it's important for all of us to do something. It's also important for me, while I do things and lend a hand, that I stay focused on anti-Semitism.
Last question here in the front. Please identify yourself.
Good morning, I'm Miriam File. I'm president of Benebrith in Venezuela. As you know, I'm not going to go over it. The case of Venezuela is very particular. Fortunately, the community has not been attacked physically. However, there is government-sponsored anti-Semitism They claim it is not. It is the demonizing Israel and the empire, which is represented by Israel and the United States. I have a small report that I would gladly hand over, but are you planning to visit Venezuela when you visit the Latin American countries?
Venezuela is my biggest target, most important. Without talking out of school, in the first month on the job, I spoke to some people in your community who said to me, "Come down." And I said, well, I'd be happy to come and visit, but frankly, I don't think I'll get any government because of the bad relationship to the United States and Venezuela. I won't get any government appointments. And they said, it doesn't matter. Just come and visit us. Just the fact that you are there, the government will know, the government will understand, and the biggest safety net we have is for the government to understand that people are watching. Not just the United States, frankly, but say, for example, European parliamentarians. That's our biggest ace in the hole. So just come down. And I have asked some of my colleagues whether people are just being polite to me, and generally said no. They said no, that makes some sense. Now, one of the problems we will have, I will definitely try to come. I need to get a visa to get in, as you know. So I will be requesting a visa, and if I'm turned down, I'll request it again, and if I'm turned down, I'll request it again.